This podcast will contain spoilers for all published books in the Ender's Game series and ancillary spoilers for The Hunger Games and books by Kim Stanley Robinson.
Welcome to the Vassals of Kingsgrave, the international spin-off of a podcast of Ice and Fire. Today, we will be discussing Ender's Game. This is Michael on the forums, Lord Prism. With me today is Greg, Claudius the Fool, and Zach,
Hello.
who is Alias.
Hey everybody.
Hello.
So, I guess to get us started, I wanted to ask, when did you first get into Ender's Game?
Okay, I read it the first time was in my freshman year of college over the summer. I was working a very boring job and I had a lot of time to read, and that's when I read Ender's Game, and then I sort of got hooked and continued on through the original 4 in the series.
Okay, so you've read the original 4. Have you read any of the others?
I read the original 4, then I read a couple years later, I read Ender's Shadow, which was like the parallel novel from Bean's point of view, and then I've read 1 or 2 of the later ones, but I stopped reading those for various reasons.
Mm-hmm. Understandable. What about you, Zach?
The first time I read Ender's Game was actually in 7th grade. It was one of those things where they wanted us to find a book to read, and that one caught my eye because I had some friends that had told me about it, and I've always loved sci-fi forever. Like, I grew up watching like Star Wars and loving that, so I was like, this will be cool. This will be a good thing to get into, and I did, and I absolutely loved it. I totally fell in love with the story, and though I haven't really gone back to it since then, and I admit I haven't read all of the spin-offs and the sequels. But I absolutely love the book, and I just finished a reread, and I enjoyed it just as much, so yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, I the first time, I didn't actually read it. It was read to me, because I was 6, and it's one of my earliest memories, but it was my mother reading Ender's Game to me, which is weird, a little bit, from my mother's, that she chose to do that. But
yeah, I guess it's a children's book, but it's really not. Like, there's a lot of like really serious
Yeah,
stuff.
there's a little debate about that, just content-wise.
It is. And looking back, it was a weird choice, and she would skip over the curse words, but that's not really like the worst part. But it was a weird choice for a children's book to read as like a bedtime story, but that's why it's been so influential in my life, I think. And I had not reread it for a long time, and then going back and rereading it now, it was really interesting to me how different a lot of things seem now that I'm older.
Yeah. Had you read it in the meantime, or you haven't really gone back to it since then?
I have read it a lot in the meantime, but I probably haven't read it for 7 years maybe.
Yeah, that was pretty. I read it. I checked. I last read it in 2007, so it's been about that for me too.
Yeah, it's been a good bit. Looking back, it makes me feel a little weird. Like my mother had some overinflated expectations for me at the age of 6, reading this to me. But
is your mother's last name Graff by any chance? Or?
No,
it is not.
No, I don't know. I think that this is obviously a topic of its own, but I think that reading kids more intense books isn't necessarily bad. They can get something out of it that you don't necessarily get as an adult. It's not the same thing. Like, for me, I had a very different experience. I wasn't that young when I read it the first time, but I had a very different experience reading it this last time, because I could appreciate a lot of the call-outs to actual history, things like Peter wanting to be like Otto von Bismarck and the Warsaw Pact and stuff like that. I completely didn't comprehend the first time. Still loved the story, but I loved it in a different way.
Right. Yeah, I actually know who Demosthenes is now after reading some Greek and Roman history. And
I couldn't even pronounce the word back then. I still can't pronounce the word. I just kind of glossed over. I was like, that's a weird name. Okay.
Yeah.
No, it really is true. And I mean, you just get different things, and it's neither better or worse necessarily when you read it at different times, but just they're vastly different books.
It's a test of a good book that you can go back to, and because it doesn't feel dated, and it doesn't feel like, oh, I don't want to read it again, because I loved it even more this time through. I picked up on so much more, and I didn't hate Peter as much as I did the first couple times.
It's interesting for me because I think I'm more critical of the book in some ways, just because when I was reading it probably from the ages like 6 to 14, it was kind of like the foundational text for me, so it was like nothing in it could be wrong, or I couldn't kind of doubt it in that way. So now looking back when I'm older, I can, question some of the things they say and disagree, and it's definitely a different experience.
Yeah.
But, so I mean, would y'all read this book to your kids, and at what age?
Well, if I had kids that were like Ender and didn't act or speak like a child ever, then I'd probably give it to him when he was very young.
Or like Bean.
Yeah, Bean. But I mean, I work in the bookstore, and we do have parents come in, and they're like, "Is this age appropriate for a 10-year-old or for a 13-year-old?" And I always like to, I tell them, we'll ask them what they're reading, but if they've read Hunger Games and they're okay with that, then this is definitely something that they could read because it's much tamer than Hunger Games. There's very little actual killing of people, just a couple compared to.
That's true, actually.
I like that culturally Hunger Games is the benchmark. That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Oh, that happened very, very. That was a big change.
Yeah.
But,
that's true, though. That's interesting.
It used to be Harry Potter, I guess. Now it's Hunger Games.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Do y'all just want to go through the questions that we have on the Google Docs? I have some others of my own, but if there's any question that you particularly kind of.
I had a couple of just points or stuff to bring up, but all the stuff I threw in the Google Doc was just like random thoughts. They're not even in any order. But if there's something that jumps out at you that you wanted to discuss, did you want to just start with like just the world that it's set in? Just this, you don't really find much out about the big world at large. It's all through the kids' eyes, but I think that plays a part as to what's actually, why the events are going on as they are in the story.
Yeah, no, definitely. I actually think the world at large is something that I caught on this time that I didn't really catch on to last time. Like there's one point, I forget who it is, but somebody's talking about playing basketball with their older brother until like the police, like the peace officers come and take them like take away the basketball. And just that scene seems very kind of
police society dystopian.
It does. It feels very dystopian, and I never caught that. But it's just these little hints kind of throughout. And
yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no.
No, I don't know if do you consider it a dystopian story, or it's not post-apocalyptic. Like the subject that I fit into is pre-apocalyptic because the world almost ended, and they're kind of in this limbo where there is a kind of police state from what we know, and there's religious suppression. There's the population control, so it's got aspects of a dystopia, but it doesn't seem like it's 100%. Feel like they're living in a oppressive society.
It is interesting because there were aspects kind of on like a day-to-day life thing, a day-to-day way things seem not that insanely police state, but then again, like they have the monitors, they have a complete like lack of religious freedom, it seems, and population control. So kind of in all the benchmarks, it kind of really is a police state. I never really thought of it like that.
Yeah, but the monitors, I think, like that's all done with the approval and with the permission of the parents. From what I know, with Ender it was because they needed the permission to have a third. But I would assume with Peter and Valentine, it was along the same lines. They couldn't just take a kid and do that. You had to be with the blessing of the parents. Unless that's just. Did you guys think that, or do you think they just kind of took the kids and did what they wanted?
For me, the first time reading it, my emotional reaction was very into the camp of the feeling I always got when I read something that was sort of dystopian. Like at that point in time, I had just read The Giver.
And this definitely goes with that.
Right, I had a very similar reaction to this book that I had with that, and I don't know. I always just got that sense. Intellectually, I'm not sure to what degree it's police state when compared to something like that, but it just gives me that feeling of things are very regulated. They're living a very different life and under very different standards than we are now, and it's interesting for me to explore that, and it was interesting in this book as much as anything else dystopian that I've read.
I will say, until I read it this time, I did not pick up on any sort of dystopian themes. I don't know why I completely missed that, but I kind of just assumed their lives were pretty much just like ours in a similar kind of situation. So I definitely missed that.
It's so weird for me because when you think of these like very young kids, like 6 and 7 and 8-year-olds doing this kind of stuff, like to some degree I just couldn't relate to it at all, and it was like impossible for me to fathom. But at the same time, it made a lot of sense in the context of the world, and I liked that. That was kind of the thing that set it apart.
Yeah, the thing, like most dystopian books, like The Giver, or they have a character who's sort of fighting against the system and trying to find out what they're hiding back. And this really isn't so much about that. I mean, you get that with when Graff finally tells them the truth about what's going on. But it's it doesn't fit into the typical mold of a dystopian quest story where he's trying to rescue someone or get to the promised land. That's the free city or something like that.
Even when he finds out. There's like this sense of doom that I feel like pervades this book and pervades Ender as a character. It's just like he knows that he has to do whatever he can to be in service of humanity. and I like that because to some extent it can be kind of limiting to the character because he only really has one course, but I don't know. I just like that sense of
he fights against that the whole time. Anytime it's all that doubt that he has, and it's always Valentine that sort of is brought in against her will or not to get him back on course.
Right.
That's true, yeah.
You know, like speaking of the age thing, I feel somewhat in the same way that I do when I read the Song of Ice and Fire books. That like in the TV show, how all the characters are aged up because you just can't imagine kind of people this young doing these things. And obviously, it's more extreme in Ender's Game, but it's that same feeling of just almost not being able to imagine that children of 6 or 12 or whatnot or doing these things. It's insane.
Yeah, it is very easy to forget. At one point, I wrote in the margins like 6. He's only 6. And in the movie, he's like 12 or 14, or they had to age everybody up. But they don't. Even they say I think it was Dink when he was like, "We don't talk like kids. We don't act like kids."
Right.
And one of the most heartbreaking scenes, or just individual scenes, was when Bean was talking to Ender after their last battle. And let me just see if I can find the quote because it almost made me cry. Where and he says, Bean was he was a soldier, and if anyone had asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, he wouldn't have known what they meant. They don't have childhoods anymore,
and they don't have lives after that kind of. You mean like there was no growing up. There's nothing.
Yeah, well, you get that whole sort of like when they're laughing at the end once they've destroyed the buggers, and they're like, "Well, let's just go be kids again." You have that like moment of maybe they could go back to that, but it's not possible.
And you have to ask the question then is why are they kids? Why does it have to be with main characters that are so young to the point that we can't really even fathom them being that young because they're intellectually to a much higher level? But I think that you make the point perfectly that this is why they're young because it really heightens the sense of injustice that they've totally lost their childhood. And that's why I think it works.
Well, from the military standpoint, they need them that young because I think it was Major Rackham or Graf when he said, we needed people who weren't grown up, who hadn't actually fought in war, who could, think like the buggers and they needed that empathy also, which is the major part of it, the empathy and compassion.
But maybe you can buy that for them being slightly older, like teens possibly, but I guess they lose their creativity, and that's kind of the emphasizing point that they're not shaped by society yet.
Right.
So, do y'all think, like, in real life, are there 6-year-olds running around who are like this? Who are this brilliant?
I've never met any.
Because it just seemed weird. And actually, so I've read, I think, like, everything Orson Scott Card has ever written. There are many, many books that he's written where it's about a child who is, like, brilliant. And... Like to a point where it's almost like the theme of his works that he has like children who are just absurdly brilliant, and it's weird. It's kind of a weird theme, and so I've been trying to kind of think about why that was, and I understand kind of from like a narrative literary point of view of why it heightens the injustice, but just kind of in world, like, does this make sense that their entire military system is kind of built around children?
For me, I always got the feeling that there was like genetic engineering at play. Like I couldn't really that's always what I thought when I read about characters that were this smart, this young, but maybe not. It's never really explicitly stated, but that's always been the justification for me of why they're so genius.
Yeah, we get that from Graf, or when he's talking to the mother, I think, Ender's mother, where he says, you guys weren't the most brilliant people, but for some reason when you two came together, you created brilliant children, and they knew that Peter wasn't right for this reason and Valentine wasn't right for that reason. So we know they've got some sort of genetic testing or ways to measure, who will create these soldiers. Otherwise, they wouldn't have given them the opportunity to have a third child.
Right, and I mean, with extreme population control, I guess you can have very intense kind of eugenics systems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I never knew if the religious stuff, the repression and the population control, do you think that's something that has been going on in this world for like hundreds of years, or is it since the first bugger attack that it's something that they had to?
Well, the first was, I think it was like a little over 100 years ago. He said at some point. The first.
I know the second one was 80
attack?
years ago. They said, right?
Okay.
Well, the hint we get is that Ender's father's grandfather was in a family of like 16 kids, and they were very Catholic, I think, and that's when it broke down after that generation. That was the last generation that it was like that.
Yeah, because I did read one of the I think it was a short story collection. Was it First Meetings, where they sort of gave his parents' backstory? I read it.
Where his father and his mother meet.
Yeah.
It was in the First Meetings collection. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I remember reading a couple of those, but I don't remember the details really.
Yeah. And actually, it's one little funny thing where in those short stories you see that his parents are the parents are much smarter than they ever give on to the children, which always was something that I wondered about why these kind of media, like I guess apparently not that smart people, produced three of the smartest people ever.
Because they always seem in the book, it always seems like they're portraying the dad as not too smart, but I guess he's just more bigoted than smart is what they're going for with him supporting Demosthenes.
Well, and I would assume they're playing along because you get the glimpses of how they do, pray over the children when they were very young, and that they got something out of that, even though it was against the law to do so.
Right. All right. What did we? Oh, actually, I wanted to talk about the monitors really quickly, and just more generally about the entire battle school selection process, because that's something I've been kind of thinking about. So it is shown in one of the Shadow spin-offs that some people are given tests to kind of tell if they're good for battle school, and it just kind of seems I wonder how at the age of 3 or whatnot that somebody has the potential to be good for battle school, kind of how this test process works, how they get in. It seems like they almost have really advanced psychological tests.
Yeah, I can just picture them like having toddlers with boxes or blocks they're playing with and admiring them. That that's that one. He's obviously doing something very smart with those blocks. But I'm sure they have. Was it Argentina? Some soccer team just signed like a toddler to a contract or something.
Really?
Oh man.
Yeah, I saw it was on the Daily Show.
That's funny.
That's a whole nother thing though, with them getting those kids going in sports so early. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's explicitly clear how exactly they measure that kind of stuff. It's just that generic thing of they're playing with the blocks in the right way. They're a tactical genius. Yeah, it's just that kind of thing.
Interesting. Okay, so we have basically should Graf and the IF have lied to Ender, or could they have just been honest?
The way the chapters are set up where you have Graf talking to various commanders and subordinates in the little prologues, they tell you right off the bat we can eventually tell him the truth at some point, like as a last resort. But I think my personal view is, to get them to do what they needed him to do, they did the right thing. It broke him and it really messed him up mentally and psychologically, but I think from their point of view they did what they thought was best. If they weren't doing it to hurt him, they were doing it really what they thought was best.
It could be that Ender still could have pulled it out despite the lies and the coercion and things like that, but you get little hints about what they're doing actually taking root and actually having an impact. Like he actually does believe at points in time that the parents or the adults will help him, but they don't, and he eventually recognizes that when they want him to, and you can clearly see Ender changing as a result of this subterfuge, so you can see that it's having an impact on who he is, so there is some value to them keeping stuff hidden.
Yeah, I actually felt that Carr did a really good job at kind of entering in, because I kind of highlighted places where Ender would say, ultimately I think the teachers would have come to save us, and then eventually it dawning on him that nobody was ever coming. I do wonder though that somebody I'm not a psychologist, so I could totally be wrong, but somebody as smart as Ender, would he really think that if he was fighting at the Bugger homeworld, that somebody teachers would swoop in and help him? I feel like he would know, and I guess it's a psychological unconscious thing, but I feel like he would know that nobody was coming to help him.
He knew that after the last fight with Bonzo, there was that time where the teachers could have shown up, and he knew. Even I think it was before he attacked him. They're not coming. I have to do this on my own. But I don't know. I think that he. It's tough because he is 6 years old. It's all in hindsight. We're looking at as mature grown-ups that he could have thought like that, but just the pressure that he was under from everything else, and he was having the dreams of everything, that the buggers were messing with him that way, that he wasn't in a right place. And I think they were giving him some sort of drugs also, weren't they? Like some sort of weird uppers just to keep him going.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think that there is that hint there, especially during the fight with Bone. So he does honestly, we're in his head, and he honestly believes they're going to come break up the fight. And at least in that case, he does think they're going to help. And after that, he's obviously hardened to the real truth.
Yeah, I do think I forget that he is 10 at that time. So that is true.
even if they're
I tried to
intellectually-
think of myself of like what I was doing when I was 6 years old. I'm like, I can't imagine doing any, even like the
No,
simplest.
you can't go down that road. You don't-
I actually specifically try and not think about what I was doing at 10 because it just makes me feel shitty.
Right,
Honestly.
exactly. Like it's the same when I watch the Olympics. Like
I know.
these kids doing amazing things. Like I can't think that like that. I'll just feel horrible.
I know. I can't think about what I was, how smart I was not at 6.
All those
Or
people
now.
peaked early though, so they're all,
That's true.
They're going downhill after that.
They're all garbage men now, I'm sure. Just kidding.
We have that to rely on.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about Peter for a little bit. Specifically, we can kind of start on the scene where he apologizes to Ender at the beginning of the book, which is a scene I did not remember whatsoever before the reread.
Yeah, that's one of the few scenes that is always stuck with me because, I have a younger brother and we've had this weird, very confrontational for no particular reason. And my mom would always, why do you guys fight? And sometimes you don't know, but I honestly didn't know if he was being honest when he was standing over him. Did he know he was asleep? Did he know he was awake? And or is this just like the first step in his long plan of getting Ender and Valentine to, sort of come under his control?
Yeah.
Did you guys think he was being honest?
For me, I think that Peter is, along with a lot of the kids, is very emotionally disturbed and has a lot of issues. Obviously, has a lot of issues. He's killing squirrels in the woods and all that. And I think that manifests here, where he does have moments of feeling horrible, but in other points in time he's completely cold-hearted. I think that's how it works. But it could just be him being very, very calculating and like that. Because we do see that too. We do see he's very good at playing people.
Oh yeah.
I
don't know. I'm inclined to think that he actually is feeling genuinely sorry here. He's very messed up in the head, and we see that here.
Yeah, and like that's this safe place where he can get it out, where he's not actually saying it to him face to face.
Well, and I remember later in the book when Peter starts crying to Valentine when he's asking her to kind of start this whole thing with him. She says, I know he is doing it to manipulate me, but I also think there is something genuine there. And so I don't think that it's just an either or kind of, like that he's just doing it to manipulate, or that he honestly is feeling something that he could, he knows that Ender is listening and doing it to kind of manipulate, but that he honestly knows how disturbed he is.
That makes sense to me. Yeah.
No. I'd actually kind of thought while I was going through it about the things that Peter did, and I think the only thing that he did, besides just things that he said, was with the squirrel. Like the only thing that was really disturbing to me. Obviously, threatening to kill people in very specific ways is disturbing in and of itself. But I just listened to this story on NPR about children who are very psychopathic, and then when they turn 14 or 18 they just kind of switch out of it and they're perfectly fine after that. I don't know. I feel like threatening to kill somebody could be a symptom of childhood. I don't know, something.
Well, it's like he's playing on the typical all serial killers when they were younger used to torture animals and everything, but it seems like he's turned very early from that and he's vocalizing it. I can't imagine Jeffrey Dahmer or someone going to his mom saying, hey, I need help, I've been killing squirrels. He actually turns to his sister, you have your fires that you light and I have this is something that I do for release. But it's very gray if he's actually doing it for release. Is he doing it because he enjoys it, or is he doing it because if he doesn't do it, he's going to do something bigger? Right.
It's weird. There's a lot there, and especially going from this Peter to later Peter, it's a lot. It's sometimes hard for me to see how it's the same person, this really, really psychopathic child, to a much more kind of reasonable adult.
We also, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't ever get any part of the book that's from Peter's point of view, right? It's always Ender or Valentine.
No,
so
there are other books that are from his point of view, but not at this point, no.
Yeah, because is that the Shadow series, right? Where the first one was Bean, and then I know he sort of comes under Peter's control, and they have a weird relationship.
But not as a child ever, and you especially never see Peter as a child from his point of view. So that is interesting.
I admit I have not read the Shadow series or anything that depicts Peter as an adult, but I get the sense just from the points where they're growing up and getting into this Locke and Demosthenes charade that the only thing that his more psychopathic tendencies in childhood influenced was just his megalomania and just wanting to control things. But he mellowed out besides that.
do y'all want to pick one of the topics? I don't want to.
Well, I just had one of the bigger themes for me was bullying. Like, you can read this on the surface, and you're like, oh, this is a great anti-bullying story where the kids fight back. But I was picked on in school, and if I ever killed one of the people who was picking on me, I would not be sitting here today. So the whole big thing about proportional force, does he ever use the right amount of force? But do you guys think it's a good story to give to kids who are being bullied, or it might give them the bad idea?
I really don't think so. I think that
I agree.
I think that it's painting a very dark picture of the necessity of keeping these kids off of him. He does these things because he knows it's the most it's the only way they'll get away from him and stop bullying him, and it's sad that that's the case. It's not a good thing.
Well, and the thing is, it's just like, especially with Stilson, I guess.
Yeah, the first one.
Kids go through that all the time. Like, every single day, I'm sure a child goes through bullying like that, and it is terrible and should not happen. But killing the bully does seem extreme.
Yeah, because I don't think at any point Stilson was going to kill Ender.
I don't think so either. I think that one is the more disturbing. Like Bonzo is different in some ways, but like Stilson was really just a kind of normal childhood bully. Like he probably wasn't even a bad guy. He was going to grow up and feel bad about what he did, and I mean, he killed him, and that's really terrible.
We have to bear in mind that he wasn't trying to kill him necessarily.
I guess that's true.
Trying to
that goes into like
him.
his whole that instinct that why the IF wants him is because he has that instinct that killer instinct. But I mean, it seems like the way he kills him and the way he drives Bonzo's nose to his brain. Do you ever think at some point that he actually has like not superpowers, but that he's genetically better at any? Is that part of this breeding process?
I
because
don't know.
He seems like he kills these kids relatively,
he does seem to kill
easily.
pretty easy. Yeah.
I just think he's recognizing how to win a fight very easily.
I picture him like
he's very
the new
intuitive.
Sherlock Holmes, where he can like pause everything and like just notice 20 things and
exactly.
yeah. That's probably something like that.
Yeah, he just knows what exactly to do to win a fight, and he just went too far with that.
Right.
Yeah. Well, there's like a line just before he fights Bonzo, and it says, I have to like hurt him bad enough that he fears me more than he hates me, so he won't ever attack me again. And I wondered if some part of him knew that there was no amount of fear that he could put in him that would make him not hate him more. Especially with somebody so proud, that I wonder if there was some part of him that just knew that he had to kill him. That was the only. I mean, well, not had to, but like in this framework that he has created, where he wants things not to come back, that he had to kill him.
I don't think he could have consciously known that, because we would have seen him recognize it consciously. But yeah, it could be a subconscious thing at play.
And from what we get later, Bonzo was dead that first strike, right? He was dead because when he looked up, he said he saw his dead eyes, so he was dead at that point, right?
Before he kicked him in the crotch, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. He drove his back into his brain, his nose into his brain, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. He says. The only way to end things completely was to hurt Bonzo enough that his fear was stronger than his hate. There was no doubt in Ender's mind. There was no help. And that's when he first realized that there was no teachers weren't going to ever rescue him at any point.
Yeah.
So he got that lesson, because that's what Graff and Anderson or whoever was talking about right before that. Like, what's happening, and that general comes in like you're risking the entire world on him winning this fight with his bully, and he did.
I think that's a good segue into talking about Graff as a character. What do you guys think about him and his
I can't help but like him, because I think he's got a good sense of humor, and he pokes fun at the whole situation, very many times over. Yeah. But I think he was the right man for the job.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. He's a very, very Machiavellian kind of guy, but he has a sense that he emotionally it's tearing him apart. That he has
you see that how he's getting, he's eating more, he's becoming fatter, and then when it's over, he loses all the weight.
There's a huge stress on him, but he feels very strongly intellectually that he has to do this, and he knows how to do it, but it's tearing him apart. So yeah, I do empathize.
Yeah, well, the whole system is based on it's the ends definitely justify the means. There's really no wiggle room for anything in there to say otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't hate him. I can't say a lot more than that, but I can't hate him because of, I guess ultimately what he was able to do and do very well.
Yeah. Well, you finally see when they're going to Eros, and he's like, there's no more censorship. You can tell him everything, you know, except for the fact that he's actually fighting the buggers. Like, that's when I really sort of got Graf, where he was explaining, you know, he knows he's not going home. He knows that this is for the long haul, and you know, he really is doing it for the greater good. Whether or not there actually is a greater good, that's a whole nother question.
Very much so.
Yeah. Something I'm curious about in that vein is, why does the military, and I guess the government in general, feel so strongly that they have to eliminate the buggers? Obviously, on the surface, they caused a near genocide for the people of Earth, but if they have the information that they don't appear to be planning an invasion, and in fact they as a threat on the outskirts galvanize the people together, why do they feel so strongly that they have to eliminate the buggers completely?
Well, I think that knowing they could come back at any time, that's almost more stressful than either winning or losing. You know,
Yeah.
I've read enough pre-apocalyptic stuff that you know that there's an asteroid coming in 30 years, or you know that something, you know, climate change is going to happen, and society can't function going on like that. They always try to you know, live your life normally and go forward, but I think the world couldn't have just gone on knowing that they could come back at any time.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. It's just interesting because we get to the point where they regret that choice to eliminate the buggers entirely.
Right. And I mean, it's kind of an interesting study in a small group of people making a very, I mean, almost infinitely large decision for all of humanity. Yeah,
it's literally a handful of people that are choosing, that are doing this.
Yeah, and it's absolutely insane, and like the hubris of it is insane.
Another thought I have when I read this is, why is there so much secrecy associated with anything concerning defeating the buggers? Do they have like Cylon agents planted in the ranks of the humans, or like monitors? Like, why? What are they worried about?
It's interesting.
Like, what are they afraid that anyone's going to discover? I guess they want to keep the civilian population under wraps, but it always kind of confused me why there was such a heightened level of.
You mean like the fact that they showed like doctored videos and they never showed any actual like stuff?
It's more the stuff about only like a few people knowing about arrows and keeping that very hidden from people, and the plans are always like so kept under wraps, it feels.
Yeah, from what I got is that the whole IF it's an international thing, but it's basically run by the West, and the fact that I think we got the impression that the Russians basically own half the world, and you know they're taking over Africa, that they don't trust the Russians, and if they know what's really going on, that's what Peter goes into, that the war will just start up again, the Civil War, and so I guess less information is a good thing until it's over.
It's not about keeping it out of bugger hands, it's about keeping it out of the Russians' hands.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and like I think partially also just kind of a general military kind of culture of intense secrecy, just kind of taken to its ultimate end and kind of utmost end.
Yeah, I got that.
What everything is. One thing I wanted to ask really quickly about, so it's mentioned in there that the Netherlands is part of the Russian Empire or whatever it's called. What's the Russians? What are the Warsaw Pact?
The Warsaw Pact, yeah.
Second Warsaw Pact.
Second, right.
You know, actually, do y'all know when Ender's Game was written?
1985, I think.
Yeah, it was originally serialized in analog, I think, and then it was finally published in 86 or 87.
Okay.
Because I was actually just thinking, like, the EU wasn't big then, but, like, I just wonder, like, what happened to Europe? That, like, a very kind of core Western country was taken over, and, like, what happened to America that a core Western country was, like, taken over by the Russians and nobody cared? Like, in, like, a NATO country? And, I mean, they probably cared, but, like, they didn't, like, they didn't stop it. That was kind of interesting to me. I mean, we don't know anything about it, so
yeah. It's just we don't really even know if starts off like 100 years after 1987 or if it's 200 years, because they never get a specific year. We don't know. There could have been the Cold War could have. It was written while the Cold War was still going on, so this could have been projected as the Cold War never ended, and it just evolved into Russia taking over whatever they can, and the West, drawing certain lines, and they obviously didn't draw the line over the Netherlands.
I don't think there's a very specific reason. Just the Iron Curtain pushing further west.
I really enjoy reading books that are kind of set in the mid to late 80s, like before the Soviet Union fell.
Oh yeah, that's great because they never thought that it would have ended.
Right.
No, and it's just like a lot of, and like these are obviously written a lot earlier, but a lot of like Asimov's books are like about like the Soviet Union, like the one set on Earth, about like the Soviet Union and the U.S. and it's really interesting.
Yeah, well, there's the Kim Stanley Robinson, the Mars Trilogy, which those are written in like 85, 86, and it's all America and Russia, 400 or 500 years in the future.
Yeah, this is a side note and completely off topic. Those are like my favorite books I've ever read. Besides,
I've always wanted to go back and read more of his, but I never. He did that other trilogy, the climate change trilogy.
Yeah.
And I literally have them on my shelf. I was like, I'll read that next, and I just have not picked it up.
I will tell you, The Years of Rice and Salt is an amazing book. The premise is that all of Europe, like 99% of Europe, was wiped out in the Black Plague.
No, the plague, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's kind of like what happened in the world if Europe wasn't there. They're great. But anyway, so.
I'm the odd man out here on these, so I'll have to check them out. If you link me to them, I'll put them into the show notes for when this is published too.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, they really are great books. I mean, I always tell people they do have a bias. Like they are kind of like very liberal books, but
okay. Like there's nothing wrong with that. And most there's very few science fiction writers that aren't that don't come down on the side of science.
Yeah, but I
have you? He wrote one of my all-time, another digression, but favorite short stories, the Lucky Strike. Do you know that one?
No.
It's an alternate history where the Enola Gay that dropped the bomb on Japan malfunctioned, so it was the second plane that had to go, and the commander was a pacifist, so he decided to drop the bomb over the ocean, but it had the exact same effect of scaring Japan without killing 200,000 people. And it basically evolved into this whole arms, reduction, and there are no nuclear weapons anymore in the world.
That's interesting.
But of course, Truman executes him for treason.
Yeah.
I love that alternate history stuff.
That's how I got into science. I read Harry Turtledove until my eyes turned blue.
No, I love alternate histories. Right. I don't. Do you want to talk about the? Oh, actually, let's talk about women in this book. Or
both of them?
Feminism. And
all just, two of them.
Well, just as a concept. Yeah. But just kind of like I guess feminism in the books, the women, how they're portrayed, just everything kind of, yeah. So one thing that I actually read, that this is not necessarily what Orson Scott Card believes, but it does kind of show, at least me, why there might not be that many women in there. Basically, Graf says that women have like evolved to not be fit for battle school, like at the beginning, and that was weird for me. And here we go. A few girls, they don't often pass the test to get in. Too many centuries of evolution are working against them.
Yeah, I remember that quote. Yeah, and
that made me a little uncomfortable.
There's something to that statement, though, as horrible as it sounds. Just the idea that a patriarchal culture has enforced evolutionary trends upon us.
Well, like for me, I guess I can agree if instead of saying evolution, we say like societal
like
conditioning,
kind
of.
Yeah, condition.
Right.
I'm more in favor of that. Yeah, evolution, I feel like is pretty loaded in going that far.
But then, like, also, it's kind of like, okay, Graf, you are perpetuating this societal conditioning of women not being in there. So, I mean, that's kind of a nitpick a little bit with Graf. But, I don't know. It is interesting, because then Dink later says that Petra's only good for shooting. Like, she's not good at, like, tactics, which is obviously proved wrong later.
The most masculine thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But, it's kind of like, I wonder if it does seem, I mean, they're young children, but that there is, I mean, certainly a fair amount of sexism in the world. What do y'all think about sexism in the world or Card?
Also,
or
I think the fact if we accept that the whole two-child rule has been going on for a couple generations, that same thing that happens in China is that there's going to be less women than men. So if it's been going on for a couple generations, there might be just less of a population, of a pool to pick from.
That's interesting, actually. Yeah, I had not thought of it from that side.
But like I said, we don't know how much time's gone by. But
right.
That's my thought there. But I don't think we're supposed to take away the fact that it's necessarily anti-women. They don't want them,
right? Because
Petra's a brilliant commander, and she's basically is Ender's left hand. So we're not supposed to.
So she is the first one to break under the pressure in the simulations. There could be some kind of sexist undertone to that.
No, yeah, there's plenty.
But it's more speaking to maybe just Ender mismanaging his officers.
Yeah. I mean,
Valentine, who's. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I don't know.
No, I forgot where I was going anyway.
No. I was going to say. I mean, like, personally, I would have loved if Peter and Valentine switched genders so that the too aggressive one was a female and the too passive one was male. But I mean,
well, you had that in their characters that they were playing opposites.
In Demosthenes, yeah, and Locke,
and Locke. So you did have that, and that could have been him playing with us, or showing that they can do, it is interchangeable. That is true, because she was saying too. I feel like for a book that only has 2 female characters, it's not terrible in terms of gender. So
I think that just in general it heightens a lot of the patriarchy because of how militarized society has become.
Right. It's very true.
It's interesting. In the movie, they did make Major Anderson a woman. And
really?
It was Viola Davis from she's in The Help. She played her.
From The Help? My God.
She was amazing. But it sort of changed the entire role where Dap, who was, the
mother.
I'm your mother, he was like the brusque, drill sergeant, and she sort of became the, not shoulder to cry on, but this, balancing force to that. Because at the battle school, I don't think we met any female officers, did we?
No.
I
don't think there was a single female officer.
Yeah, I don't believe so either. Yeah,
I thought that was an interesting, the way they changed that.
I thought that was pretty good. Like in the book, Anderson is kind of just this guy who really loves like games and playing sports and stuff. And I thought,
and he goes on to become the commissioner of the NFL.
Right. It was interesting to have more of a foil to Graf in those conversations.
Yeah. Actually, so do y'all mind if I ask you about the movie? I guess because I haven't seen it, and as much as I kind of want to, I've promised myself that I won't. But as I was reading this book, there were certain things that I was like, God, I wish I could see, how this person looked, or how the fighting in the battle room looked, or
the battle room. The technology was amazing. The way they did the zero gravity stuff with whatever crazy pulley system. But the characters, none of them were how I picture them, because they were all 5 to 10 years older.
Yeah.
But Colonel Harrison Ford as Graf, I thought was really good. You only literally had one scene of Valentine and Peter. They just cut that whole backstory out. You didn't get any of
really?
And Demosthenes stuff.
Really?
You did have the scene where he came home and she, with the lake and everything, and you just saw Peter push him onto a bed and say, "Let's play Buggers and Aliens," and I hate you, and I'm going to kill you. That was the only time we saw Peter.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't think it was a horrible movie like the Avatar: The Last Airbender movie, but where I just generally hate everything about it. But I think this is the kind of story that just cannot be adapted into a movie. There's just the good stuff about it is not the action for me.
It would make an awesome anime or an animated series where you could just show everything and not have to worry about budget. Right. But
you can have internal monologues and just get into the characters and things like that. That's what makes this interesting to me, is the characters and exploring the world, and you just don't get that in the movie.
Yeah, and I also thought they planned on making this like a franchise, and from what I know, it didn't make its budget, so I don't think they're going to keep going with it.
I couldn't even imagine. From what I know of the sequels, they're so distinct from the first book.
And there's very little action in any of the other books. Epic. I love them. I love them, but
I love them. I think that they would make the worst movies I've ever seen.
Yeah. Well, some of my favorite books, I haven't seen the movie versions, or I don't want them to be movie versions.
There would be almost no action in the entire 3 books after this. I mean there was action, but not a lot.
Yeah.
All right. Which of y'all posted the Queer Theory article?
I had found that from listening to the Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. They had the editors of that series on, and that was one of the they focused on 2 essays, and that was one that when I was reading this, I picked up on some things that's kind of weird, and then when I read this, it was just all out there, point by point, and it was interesting. It's not anti-Orson's. Well, yeah, it is. I don't know if we want to go down Orson Scott Card hate territory, or keep that separate, or do it at
I'm interested to talk about this, and I admit I have not seen or read the essay. I'm afraid, but could you just give us a brief outline of kind of what points it makes? Because I'm curious.
Yeah, it basically comes down on the side that he's not against there's so many scenes in the book in the book of male sort of playing off each other or acknowledging that there's attraction between Ender and Bonzo. There's that scene where he's like, I would follow those hips anywhere, or I could get lost in those eyes. I remember that one. I underlined it and I just wrote what.
Okay.
But he compares it to the ancient Greek, where it's not so much that it's being submissive is what he's against. It's not the male attraction. It's when one man is submissive to another man. That's what he's against. He's not against
Huh, okay.
You know, it's part of the boys club. You know, men shower together and they're naked. The kids are naked all the time. You know, which is that took some getting used to. But it's he points out a lot of stuff like that. But he does come on the side that there's a lot of homoerotic stuff, and I didn't print out all the stuff I had of that. I had read it, and actually I think it's in the forums is what I had up there. But homosocial relationships is what he focused on, how the kids bond together and get along with each other. But the second that Bean, you know, you think Bean might sort of have connections with Ender, that's like shot down. And you know, when Eli, you know, blesses him and says peace be with you, like he knows that that's something that he shouldn't have said. It's wrong. You know, it's those little jabs like that.
See, I kind of follow in the camp, and I could be talking out of my ass here. Like I say, I haven't read the essay, but I feel like a lot of those relationships don't really speak to Orson Scott Card, like trying to introduce a male-to-male, like sexuality type things, because I think that they're just him trying to show relationships between kids, just them building relationships with each other, and I don't think there's anything sexual about it, personally. Like things with like Alay, like kissing him on the cheek and saying salam.
Oh no, I don't think that was either, because you do forget that they are 6 years old and this isn't
they're
even on
just
their
kids.
radar.
And there's nothing I don't think sexual about that kind of stuff. But I can buy the argument, especially when analyzed from queer theory, that there could be something more there. But I hesitate to give Orson Scott Card a free pass.
But they also did focus that the books are more sexist than homophobic, with the anti-women stuff and the lack of women. And you know, anytime that empathy is shown, empathy with the buggers is okay, but empathy between Ender's equals is shunned upon, or his subordinates is shunned upon. And so that was, and the whole thing with calling them buggers, which I didn't pick up on until the last time that I read the book.
Yeah, like on that I'm torn, because on the one hand it like very much is like, or was, I guess, like a kind of old-fashioned slur for gay men. But there's something about it that just makes me like, there was some part of me that feels like that's not why he called them that. I don't know. Like it would seem so odd to name your alien. I don't know. It seems weird.
I kind of agree. Like, I also think he's this prim and proper Mormon man that probably didn't know that, and it was just like they're alien.
That's
they're bug
very
aliens.
valid.
I'm just gonna pick buggers. I mean, they were called buggers
in '85.
In Starship Troopers too. You know, and that was written in the 50s. So
yeah, I don't think he was trying to make a dig there personally, but I really don't. Like when I read it, I think it's a very powerful word to indicate their sort of racism or.
But the one part that I thought was not funny, but like that they had their biggest point with using queer theory was when they were talking. This is just a quote from the article. It says, "Keep in mind that bugger has been used for a long time as a derogatory slang for a man who engages in sexual deviance, and this is on the asteroid Eros, named for the Greek god of love. A man and a boy are sharing a bedroom on Eros, so they can learn how to think like buggers. We don't have to read deeply into this to see that something very homosocial, if not homosexual, is happening." And that's kind of how they ended it. It really wasn't and we hate Orson Scott Card. He's an awful person. It was almost sort of giving him a way out, I guess.
That's interesting. I like interpretations like that. I just think that that absolutely was not what he was going for in writing.
Yeah.
So one thing that's kind of always bugged me.
No pun intended.
No, not at all. And this is a small thing, but do y'all think that Mazer Rackham had to sacrifice his entire life and come back to help Ender? I mean, I understand that he kind of figured out the buggers and was able to like figure out who he needed to kill and go in and like destroy the ship with the Queen. But I just felt like in some ways like it was not he was not necessary.
Yeah, what did he even do when you think about it? He didn't really do anything.
We don't really get it. We don't get a specific. We know he somehow identified the Queen ship and took that ship out, but that's something they kind of really. You saw the movie, Zach?
I saw the movie, yeah.
Yeah, that I thought they did do really well in the movie, where they literally like were showing the video of the ships attacking, and like he paused it and he said, "This is what I did, and this is how I figured out, you know, who that ship was."
Well, we do get the moment where he has in the book that also happens in the movie where he has Ender look at it and he figures out.
Oh, for the patterns, yeah, he did the patterns, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It feels like he didn't need to. I am inclined to agree with you, Michael, there that it's a little bit odd that he had to be put in like the stasis of going through space to come back.
I feel like he could have like written it down in like a book or like a video, like a 5-minute video that says like this is the pattern, and then like I don't know, like
his only contribution was you have to find the Queen. Here, just look for the patterns. You got it.
Yeah,
like do anything else.
it doesn't seem like he's like this insane strategist that, he was the ender of his time and that like, he is going to teach all these things. I don't know. It just seems very kind of.
Well, I
simple.
don't think we're supposed to think that he was a grand strategist, because if I recall correctly, he was like all their top brass guys were destroyed and killed, and he was like the last line of defense, and he somehow found out. And I think that's why they kept him around, is that all the things that he needed to get across to Ender was not something that could be done in a book or making a video and sending it to him. It was in the training. It was in the exercises. That's why he's this kind of Zen master where you meet him for the first time and he's this, kung fu master sitting on the floor who, you don't know what the hell's going on. And then it becomes this, the crazy montage of the fights and the training. But it's, I think a lot of his stuff had to be, so Ender just had to get from him in many different ways, not from paper.
I think in a way it's a part of the deception, because Ender needs to believe that he's not actually fighting the buggers, but he's fighting someone who can think like the buggers, and the only person they have that he would believe is Mazer Rackham, because he's been so idealized for that very skill.
Right, and that was a pretty awesome scene. The first time I read that, I was like, "Oh, Mazer Rackham's back! It's awesome."
He's been idealized for us too, so it was definitely cool in that moment.
That's a really interesting point. I like kind of his role as duping Ender. That's interesting.
Yeah, I thought Ben Kingsley he did a pretty good job as Mazer Rackham in the movie.
Yeah, he was good.
Mm-hmm. So you have a point on here about Ender doing more damage than Peter does, and like Peter ending up doing well. I can't find it now, but
oh yeah, it's right here. That was spoiled after Ender kills the buggers. Once he realizes what he's done, he's like, oh no, I'm reading the wrong one. Sorry.
Right, like, who is worse? And like, I kind of have this thing about like, and I feel like the who is worse question ties into, in my mind, like, is Ender good? Like, he is the hero, but like, is he a good person? And I have
here it is. In the end, who is worse, Ender or Peter? Ender tries to do good, but in the end causes the most damage, while Peter is evil, and then kind of saves the world.
Right. And I mean, I think like the juxtaposition between the evil Peter and good Ender, in light of what ended up happening and the harm that each one caused, it's really interesting. And this like quotes throughout the book where people always say that Ender is such a good kid and he's very like sensitive and nice and has a good heart, but I mean, it was like a 6-year-old that killed somebody, so like I feel like outside of this book, if I saw this, I don't know that I would like instantly be like, fantastically hearted kid.
Yeah, well, it's funny because in the bookstore, the first thing is parents ask like, well, is there violence and is there sex? And there's really no sex in this book, so there is violence. And the Hunger Games is kind of an anti-violence story because the kids are pushed to do these things that they don't want to do, and Ender never wants to kill anybody, consciously at least. He never wants to kill anyone, so that's why I think he is good. But he's definitely got that killer instinct that is not necessarily good in a 6-year-old.
Right. Well, he wasn't really pushed to do it in the first time with Stilson. You mean?
But no, that's the first time he decides to do it. That's the first time that it clicks.
That's like that one's like a sticking point to me, because like that's a situation that I feel like a lot of kids are faced with, and a lot of kids don't kill people in that situation. And like the Bonzo thing is, I feel like, totally different in many ways, but like I don't know, that one just kind of makes me feel like he's kind of really terrible.
Yeah, he's definitely just very, very interested in self-preservation to the point that he'll do whatever he can. And I to some degree, I do get that feeling that he is kind of being forced into it, and that if it were up to him, he wouldn't have killed Stilson, but he felt like he had to. And there could be something insidious about that fact, that he felt like he had to make sure that he never would fight him again.
Yeah, but we've all been in situations where when we were at that age and picked on, that you want to kill people, but something in you prevents you from doing that. But Ender, he did it.
And I mean, maybe that's part of what they need children for, because when you're adult, I think you realize, like, an adult in that situation with Stilson would have kind of, I think, realized that he did not have to kill Stilson, that he had other options besides killing him. But like, as a child, you don't realize. Oh yeah, sorry, what?
I'm just saying again. I think we can't forget that he didn't try to kill Stilson. That was not like he explicitly, I'm going to kill Stilson to stop him from hurting me. He just wanted to hurt him bad enough that he wouldn't hurt him again.
But what is hurting someone bad enough that they'll never hurt you again? That's.
But it's true. It's still pretty bad. But I think you have to bear in mind that he didn't think he killed him. He didn't want to kill him.
I never thought he want to, and we know he never wants to. It's because he says he loves at the moment that he loves them at that moment.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there is compassion in Ender, and I don't know if he's necessarily worse than Peter, despite what their actions reflect. I think it's interesting that Ender kind of, in terms of history, damns himself a little bit with the Speaker of the Dead book. Really helps to give compassion to the buggers and start to paint Ender badly for what he's done to completely annihilate them.
Well, that's what I love. We're allowed to talk about later books. This is spoiler. We're allowed, right? Yeah. When you find out that basically everyone in the universe hates Ender and he's reviled as the most evil person who ever lived, that's what he was afraid of becoming, and that's what he does become. And it's sort of ironic that everything he does is because he has empathy and because he has compassion. But no matter what, time will tell, and that's what history did not come down on his side.
What do y'all think of the title, Ender's Game? Like you have in here, like what does it refer to in your mind?
Yeah, is it referring to the entire thing or just the last section? I mean, obviously there's many different games that go on, but do you guys think that it's just inclusive of the entire everything that he goes through with the IF, or is there one point that it became Ender's Game?
Oh god, like my gut reaction, and this is what I thought the first time I read it, was that it really focused on him like in the simulations, like that was the game that he was playing to just get good at winning those battles, and it turned out to not be a game. It kind of deflects from the twist at the end, but there could easily be more to it than that.
Well, it could also work on both. I think it works on both levels, but like I had pretty much the same reaction the first time I read it. I felt like the last phase on when he was at command school, like that was it, because they kept telling him like this is it, Ender. Once you get past this, you can move forward. So I always thought that was kind of the actual game was the last group of simulations.
And in a way, I feel like it almost like highlights the macabre nature of the entire situation. That what is Ender's Game is this terrible war where millions of people and buggers die. You know what I mean? That there is this terrible thing that is to him. I mean, not just a game, but it is Ender's Game, and it's just it's really a war, and it just kind of highlights the injustice of using children and just kind of the macabreness of the entire situation.
Yeah,
I got that feeling too, for sure.
One thing I just wanted to get into was we touched on like Locke and Demosthenes, but this is all written pre, real world internet age, and basically what they're using is, the nets. They call them the nets. It is, chat rooms and posts and forums and stuff like that. Do you think and Card was writing this before the world at large had this technology, where he thought this is definitely possible. Like, do you think that this could have happened, where people who start basically as bloggers can become
bloggers will take over the world?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think it could necessarily happen in the current way things work, but I think that bloggers do have incredible power to influence people.
Oh, absolutely.
And there is a shift away from old media to new media that is going to continue going. So yeah, I don't think that.
Well, I will tell you, when I was young, and like very young after having just read this book, was like searching for like these places where 6-year-old or 10-year-olds could become, like world powers.
Where do I become like
right? Like where is this exactly? So like I don't quite think, because they talk about forums where world leaders discuss things, and so I'm thinking and like that you can, as a student, you can be an observer there, but you can't speak. Right. And so I was thinking about that, and they're all world forums in different areas, but like they're not public. Like you don't just go in and listen to them, and they're not all on the internet. Maybe eventually when things are all on the internet, but it's honestly it seemed like a level of kind of transparency that like we're not going to ever get, or I don't think we'd ever really get to.
I mean, our political discourse doesn't occur publicly or on the internet, so it does seem unlikely. But I do think there is huge power in new media and bloggers to influence as media, not as government.
Yeah,
I very much agree.
He was definitely ahead of his time in a lot of the, not necessarily technology. We don't have starships and we don't have the Ansible, which when I read this book, I was like, oh, this philotic connections, like that's a real thing, right? And then I realized this is just something he made up, which kind of like, I thought that's
disappointing.
Just an actual thing.
Is there any kind of basis to that jargon, or is it just random, like, philotic connections?
Everything I found was all related to the Enderverse. I did not find any actual scientific. I mean, I'm sure there's theories out there, but I didn't find anything in any, actual sources about it. Because it goes against the entire. You can't travel fast. Nothing can go faster than the speed of light. So,
right.
But yeah, so I thought we have to give him a little credit on the fact that he kind of did hit a nerve, 25 years before this stuff was actually happening.
There is a forum post on the Spore forum, if you remember that game, Spore, about whether the Philotic theorem could be possible. So I just pulled it up. I haven't read it, but I'm sure that at the end of that I will be convinced that the Philotic theory is perfectly true.
That is hilarious to me that that's where that question.
Me too. I don't know why it's on the Spore forum, but there's a lot of things on. I didn't even know there was a
Spore forum.
Me neither, but there's a lot of things on all forums that I'm sure people would be surprised to find on there.
For sure, yeah, that's pretty funny.
I know nothing about the Spore world. I'll have to sit that one out.
I just played the game. I didn't know there was a world to it per se, but
Actually, the first forum I ever joined was for the Harry Turtledove books, and there was literally like 6 people, and it was the same 6 of us posting about who, this timeline and that character. And I think I still have my login name, but yeah, it's as long as there's 2 people out there that want to talk about it, there's a place for it.
All you need.
I'm just looking forward to the Vassals of Kingsgrave taking over the world.
Yes.
Yeah. That's true. This is our net identity that we will take over.
Building our power base.
So you haven't heard about when the buggers first made contact with Ender, and that was something that I'd never really thought about, but that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think we're led to believe that at least I got was that they're trying to communicate with him when he's having the dreams on Eros, like when he's having all these horrible images, and like I picture them like in his mind picking out images and like, yo, we're trying to get through to you, stop what you're doing, and that's when they're definitely talking to him. But the fact that they built the Giant Strength game in real life for him, and that's one of my favorite scenes in the book, is when he gets to that world and he's like, oh shit, I'm in the game. And they must have been connected to him at that point when he was playing the game. If we go for the whole Philotic connections,
not necessarily though. They could have had access to just him thinking about it when he
later, that's true, memories of it.
Yeah. But I just thought that I figured that they must have been knowing what was going on, and I think that comes out in one of either Xenocide when you find out about Jane and how long she's been with Ender. But I just thought that it was interesting what point they're trying to convince him, because when he gets the egg later on and the queen speaks to him, speaks in quotation marks, you basically find out that we've been trying to talk to you. We could have lived peacefully, but you wouldn't let us.
Well, and maybe at that point they were trying to speak, but it was they weren't adept at it at all, and so he was completely unaware. And then on Eros later, when he had the dreams, that was kind of them getting further into him. And being like more successful at speaking to him.
Right.
So speaking of the mind game, this is kind of a weird thing, and you might have no opinions or answers, but you know how every time he goes, like there's new things in the corpse of the giant, like there's like a dwarf village, like towards the end. Like, do you think that is? Like, is that just fun narrative, or like is there something symbolic with like building this village out of like a decaying body? Like, what is going on there?
Well, we're supposed to believe that the commanders that I have, they don't know what's going on in the game, but I always got that like once he beat the last thing he had to do was like that was the way of the game telling him if you kill the buggers and you do what you're supposed to do, you can have a happy existence after that, and you can hang out with the kids on the slide and everything.
Right.
That was just my thought. But of course, every time he tries to in the game, like he falls through the slide or they turn into wolves.
Kids on
and
the
they kill
slide
him.
Is that the fun happy ending? I don't know.
And that's something I think that Suzanne Collins took directly from Orson Scott Card in Hunger Games. I don't know if you guys have read that, but there's a scene where all the kids come back as wolves and try to attack Katniss.
That's true. I never thought about that. That's really funny. That is really similar.
There are no true original ideas.
No, that is
never. I think this story does have lots of cool pseudo-original things, though. Like, I really like the idea of the battle room and stuff like that. I think it's just really unique and fun and entertaining, especially for me when I was young reading this.
Yeah.
I think like I read some introduction by him. It might have been in like this book, but he said when he started the idea, it was kind of like he got the idea of the battle room and just kind of went from that and added other ideas. But that was one of his kind of central ideas. I guess I probably should have asked this earlier, but do y'all have like a favorite scene or character?
I always like Dink. He's, I think, the most level-headed of the guys there, and I think if I had anything in common with any of them, like I know I wouldn't be bouncing off walls and being the sniper. I wouldn't be being, but I like the way he's figured out the game already, and he has to tell Ender what's really going on. And I just love the scene where he goes for his free time, and he literally just floats in the battle room, and that's I have the let me get the quote really fast. Of course it won't.
Another crazy pours out of him.
Yeah, I'd be crazy too, little buddy, but at least when I'd be craziest, I'd be floating all alone in space, and the crazy, she float out of me. She soak up in the walls, and she don't come out till there be battles, and little boys bump into the walls and squish out the crazy.
I love the slang in this book. Like, it just adds another level of nuance to the world, and it's funny and cool.
It really does. And it's funny thinking of like these older people. Like I think of Dink as older, like honestly. But like how old was he when
like the oldest kid we meet is like 12. The 12-year-olds
right.
are the oldest kids.
Right. And so like I think of Dink as like this like at least like 16 or 18. Like,
right. He's super like, jaded and cynical. Right.
He is. He's jaded at like 10 or 12. It's ridiculous. But no, it really is.
He's probably been there for years, and
yeah.
There's the whole hierarchy with, if you're 13 and you haven't made commander yet, that you're not going to be going to command school. And so
you have nothing. I really like Petra. I don't have like a lot of reason. Maybe it's because she's female, and I think I just liked a female person.
Something different.
Yeah, but I just imagine that she had like a harder time going through than most of the people.
And you see that like, she's like an outcast in Salamander Army.
And like,
I think she sees that in Ender, that she's really the first person that's not on his, because I think Ali was in his launch group, right? They all came up together, but she's the first person because he's assigned to Salamander Army, and she's the first one that kind of takes him under her wing or shows him kindness. And he's always got this wall up that he's like, okay, I can't be friends with anybody. But then every time he meets someone like Dink or like Petra, he's like, okay, this person might be able to, I might be able to trust this person somewhat.
Yeah, that is true. She's kind of like the first one at the battle school who's not in his launch class to recognize that and take him under. That is interesting. She's interesting because at the beginning she almost doesn't seem that smart. I mean, compared to the baseline of battle school, but she obviously is amazing, and I think a lot of it probably was kind of being held down, especially in Salamander, by her by people's views of her gender. You know what I mean? Because there was other evidence about what Bonzo felt about her gender, and like you couldn't be naked in front of her, and like all of these things.
Yeah, he's like, well, she's naked. He's like, that's not the point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Going off of that, I'd say that my favorite character is probably Valentine, just because I really love her introspections and the kind of sense of doom that pervades her, and just the difficulty of balancing being an ally of Peter and trying to keep up that childhood hatred of him for the sake of Ender, really, just in his honor almost. And I think it's interesting also how she ruminates about the mask of Demosthenes kind of becoming her. Like, I just like that idea, exploring that. It's just interesting and cool.
Which actually is like an interesting thing about maybe part of Peter becoming better was like the mask of Locke becoming him. I don't know. It's interesting. And actually, so I say Petra, but growing up, my favorite was always Peter. Not Peter this book.
Really?
So give me. So I know you haven't read the book. The later books. So just assume I'm not like a completely terrible person.
Nope, that's all the time we have today.
We're done. Sorry. No.
But actually, it's funny because my boyfriend read Ender's Game and just Ender's Game, and he was like, so Michael, all of your passwords and all of your like usernames, everything is Peter W. Like, why? He's terrible. What are you doing? So I was like, oh, good God. Sorry.
You don't understand. He gets better. It's fine.
He does. I swear.
Well, we kind of get that at the end where you know that he became this benevolent leader. And I'm assuming in this is the Shadow series, right? You see like how he consolidates power and everything. But he's I know he didn't end as awful as he began.
It's interesting to me, though, because I feel like in a way that feels bad that Peter gets to be loved by everybody. I mean, he was so mean to Ender, they should hate him, you know? Like, it's hard to reconcile that for me.
It feels terrible, no, totally.
But Ender does take a solace in the fact that the world also does grow to love him because he's the author of of the Hive Queen and the Hegemon. Even though the world doesn't know that's Ender, that he does get a certain solace out of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not horrible for Ender, but like I just have like that gut reaction, like, Peter,
injustice.
He should be hated. Why do people hate Peter? But yeah, it just highlights, like you say, the injustice of.
Yeah, I got that at the dinner table, like the first scene where they're having dinner as a family, and Peter's like being the complainy kid, and Ender's like, he just tried to kill me. And they don't know that.
Oh yeah, I hate that stuff. I'm so sympathetic to kids that that aren't recognizing, or the parents aren't recognizing how badly they have it, and they're still like, they're like the older brother will lie, and like that happened to me a ton as a kid. So yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah, I will say on the Hive Queen and the Hegemon, I have always wanted and still want when I die for like there to be like a speaker for the dead to like speak for me at my funeral. I'm totally down with that concept. I think I think that's a really interesting concept, which I'm sure like he was inspired or whatever from other cultures or what. Like I'm sure it's not completely original, but I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's not I don't think it's a religion. I mean, it kind of becomes a religion, but it's more like a philosophical, you know. But it's definitely a beautiful concept that I think that's what people try to do at funerals and at wakes. But I don't think there's ever been a completely honest everything, and people are terrified of that idea.
Right.
Yeah, don't speak ill of the dead. Like that's a very pervasive sentiment that we can't seem to get past culturally. So
that's the old George Carlin bit that Frank, that motherfucker, he owes me $10. What about Jerry? Oh, he's dead. What about Frank? Yeah. Oh yeah, that motherfucker's still alive.
Exactly.
And I do really like the book. I feel like I've been very critical of it a lot, but I very much, it is actually still my favorite book.
Yeah, it's definitely. I think it's in my I consider it more just straight science fiction. It's not. I don't consider it a kid's book. It's one of my top 10 all-time favorite books. Of course, that changes day to day, but it's definitely it's a book that's always stayed with me. Certain books you can read and you kind of remember certain things that happened, but I remember almost everything that happened in this book. Yeah. And when I was doing my reread, I was literally like, the second I finished, I forgot how much a book can move you in good ways and bad ways, but it's a book that it's a very simple book. There's very few characters and there's very few themes, but it really packs a punch.
Yeah, I don't know if I would call it a favorite, but it's just one of those books where it completely alters your state of mind after reading it. Like you just it sticks with you after reading it immediately and long term. And
yeah, I like books that make you jealous of going back to the real world, and this is one of those books that always did that to me.
That's funny.
Of course, every time I pick up A Song of Ice and Fire and I read a chapter, it's like, oh, yes, now I have to go back to work.
See, it's probably because I was young when I read it originally, but I was never jealous. I never... are you saying you wanted to go back into the real world, or you wanted to stay in their world?
Oh, no, I didn't want to go back to the real world. I wanted to just read more about get more. That's why I always like the backstory. Like, I'm fascinated by what the hell happened in the world, but, ever since I really started reading about Orson Scott Card, I'm not reading his books anymore.
Yeah. Because I read all of them, because it was always my childhood dream to go and meet Orson Scott Card eventually, and that ended once I got the internet and I looked him up on Wikipedia.
But, it's horrible. That's a horrible feeling, learning about the people that create cool things. This is a big debate, the idea of separating author.
I had a moment like that I read the Goosebump books when I was a kid. They were the only books that I was in love with. I had this bookstore near me where every fourth one you bought, you got a fifth one free, and I have the whole set. And when I started working in the bookstore, R.L. Stine came into the store one day, and I was like, "That's R.L. Stine." Do you know? He's like, "Don't go up to him. Don't go up to him." And I never go up to authors. I was like, just so you know, I'm a huge fan of theirs. He's like, I'm really just on vacation with my family. I don't want to talk. And it just completely popped the bubble of how awesome he was.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, you literally made my childhood magical, and I don't like you anymore. And but I also can keep that separate.
Yeah. Well, it's also, this is obviously it's less intense for me, but I don't know if you know the actress who played Captain Janeway in Star Trek.
Kate.
Yes, Kate something.
Kate Mulgrew?
Yes.
Yeah, because she did the audiobook. She does a lot of audiobooks.
Yeah, and she also was in Orange is the New Black.
Yes.
And have you seen what she most recently was in?
Oh, I have not.
It is a documentary arguing against heliocentrism.
No, but she's got to be a character. That can't be a real thing.
Is that a parody? It's legit.
It's a real thing, and it's really upsetting.
Wow.
And weird. I will take this back when she could, but I've seen the movie is very real, and until she comes out and says that it was a one big troll on her part, it's what it is, and it's really uncomfortable.
Oh, that stinks. I always hate. Religion stuff I can not respect, but I can understand where people come from when it's from a religious point of view. But when it's science, it's kind of it's just knowledge, and I go into the whole Bill Nye debate with the creationist God, which was a lot of fun, but very frustrating just to sit through and
I have to admire, even if he's obviously so wrong, I have to admire his ability to convincingly, I guess, argue points that don't make any logical sense. Like he's a very good rhetorician.
He has an Australian accent and he wears a suit and he's not like the typical, caricature of the person who believes that. And he's got money and he's got a following.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
You know what? So I just typed her name in, and Kate Mulgrew has posted something very recently on her Facebook page that says she was misled about her participation in this movie, and that she is not a geocentrist. So, hope there. It is weird because she's like the second person to come from this movie, so I don't know if the movie is just like clips taken from people who don't believe it that are pasted together. I guess I would not put it past them, but that's good at least. Okay, I feel a little bit better about this. Orson Scott Card's still terrible, but she's a little bit better.
I do think the thing you have to bear in mind, for me personally at least, I think, again, to preface, you do have to make this choice on your personal beliefs, on whether or not you support or enjoy something of someone you disapprove of their opinions. But I think a couple of things you have to keep in mind. One is that they're not necessarily the same person they were when they wrote that book, and they not even if their political views didn't change, those don't necessarily shape who they are as a person in other aspects.
Well, just think of people in your family who have awful political, or that you can sit down and have dinner with, but you think completely different things about. But I think at some point when I was looking into this, he did he wrote that in the early 90s or late 80s. Then he's not the same person, and he did retract.
And there are some hints, that he has retracted opinions that he wrote in the past.
He does consider himself a Democrat. I know that. So he's
really.
Or he said, I consider myself a Democrat before what a Democrat would have been in 1977. So,
okay,
whatever that means.
All right. Well, is there anything else, y'all? Look through my notes, see if there's anything else I wanted to touch upon. I want to play the mind game, not the mind game itself, but it seems like he has such intense control of his character. Like he can do anything.
The ergonomics of it are appealing. Like we want to be able to.
Yeah, exactly. Because I have on here he picks up the snake and he kisses it. He takes a knife and tries to pour the mortar, to pull the stone out by chipping away the mortar. It seems like a fantastic video game in terms of that.
Oh yeah, the processing power that they had on Battle Skull was amazing.
Yes, it seems really fantastic. So,
we'll get the Facebook Oculus Rift, and that'll be our mind game.
Hopefully,
yeah, it's definitely closer to virtual reality than more RPG.
It is, yeah.
But in the movie, they kind of did it if I recall, he was kind of using his eyes to control stuff. There were no controls with his hands.
Interesting.
So that's kind of the way they did it in the movie, when he went in the game was pretty cool because you knew it was a Pixar world, but it looked as close to reality as it could.
And they actually do have a part where they're going into brain control mode in the movie.
Right. Yeah.
Oh really? That's funny.
I just wanted to touch on just the whole Speaker for the Dead chapter is really setting up the later books.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had the same experience, but when I started reading Speaker for the Dead, I did not know. I mean, I think you got a Valentine chapter in the beginning, but for a couple hundred pages, Ender doesn't show up, and you don't really know what's going on. How does this fit into the greater world? Mm-hmm. But you kind of get that reading this. When I reread it, it's okay, these are the people that are going out and colonizing space. But some of the most powerful parts of the book is literally the Hive Queen speaking to Ender. When he finds her and she says, the humans do not forgive us, we will surely die, we are like you, we do not mean to murder, and when we understood we never came again. So this is basically proving that Dink was right, and she says that we could live with you in peace, please believe us, which he literally is holding in his hands the fate of an entire sentient species, which is one of the most powerful images for me of the book.
It really is. I know starting Speaker, it does have this feeling of what is going on? It's so very different.
Just speaking as someone who hasn't read them, I do kind of find it interesting and kind of want to explore all the traveling around, exploring the universe kind of stuff, and I probably will at some point. But for me, I feel like Ender's Game stands alone. It's just a very powerful book. But at the same time, I read that quote you have on the forums in your signature, Claudius. That come on, he said to Valentine one day, "Let's fly away and live forever." He says at the end of the book, and there's something about that. I want to.
Also,
see
it has.
happens.
There's a trope in sort of space opera science fiction that books end with this like marshaling of the forces going forth into space. I mean, Starship Troopers, Hyperion. There's all these ones where like it sort of riles the soldiers up to like go forth and multiply almost. And I didn't think we were going to get that, but it kind of does have that. And that literally that was on the last paragraph of the last page where they've been, they know that they can sort of mess with time by staying at hyperspeed for so long. And that's another scene that's always burned into my brain. And that's kind of what they do.
I haven't personally read too many books that really emphasize the very beginnings of colonization in space, so I could be interested in checking that out.
Well, you're not going to get the beginnings because it literally picks up 3,000 years later.
Darn.
I will say,
right? The prequels I did read Ender in Exile, which kind of isn't a sequel because it's set like before the last chapter of the book, but that kind of did explain the beginnings of it.
Yeah. I don't know if you've read like the early Asimov books with like the spacers and the settlers.
I've only read like a bunch of his stories, and I've read the first Foundation story. That was it.
Okay. There's some things about like when humanity left Earth and the beginning of colonization that's really interesting. And
doesn't Cart have the other series, the Return, where they go back to Earth after being
Yeah, so that one's interesting. Yeah, that's like a 5-book series, and only the last one takes place on Earth per se, but like it's not culturally Earth.
Right, isn't it?
What's what?
The Call of Earth. Is that the series? I read the first one. I think it was called The Call of Earth.
Yeah, I think it's called The Call of... is the whole thing called The Call of Earth? No, it's called... God, what is it? It's called Homecoming. It's the Homecoming saga.
I just checked the shelf. The Memory of Earth is the first one.
Yes, The Memory of Earth is the first one. According to Wikipedia, I did not realize this or ever pick up on it. It's a fictionalization of the first few hundred years recorded in the Book of Mormon.
Oh, boy.
I'm just going to tell you, I have read these books many times, and I've actually read them recently trying to, like, pick out things, and they certainly are kind of religious because they do emphasize faith to some extent, or to, like, a fair extent. Probably if I knew anything about Mormonism, I would have, like, read them and been, like, totally Book of Mormon. But, like, it didn't come off to me as that. I actually love those books also. But I read them when I was really young.
I did jump ahead, and I kind of know what happens in the last book because I just didn't think I was going to read all 5 of them. And plus, the cover of the last book has like giant rats walking around in clothing and stuff like that.
It's true. It is true.
But I was just checking my shelf. I forgot. I did read Empire by Orson Scott Card. I don't know if you guys have read that one. I think it's a series. It's like this near future Civil War, but that really gets into politics more. But I did enjoy that. But that kind of was before I found out the other stuff.
Yeah, I enjoyed that one too. I feel like the Empire books and a lot of the Shadow books, I don't know, there's this really deep literary emotional level that Ender's Game hits that those books don't hit. And maybe it's just like embitterment later on in my life, but I've always felt like they weren't as good as Ender's Game, and they didn't quite hit that level.
Yeah, and it's kind of ironic because it is the simplest of the books that I've read. It's the simplest one of his, and it's the most straightforward. And simple books can pack that punch easier than books that are a lot more subtle.
This is not an uncommon thing with writers where they get a big hit and they cash out on it. It feels like with lots of sequels, never-ending sequels.
Yeah. It actually surprised me how simple this book was on reread because I think I read it in like 3 days, which I had this coming up, so I kind of had to read it quickly, but it's not a hard book to read. It's really short. It's really fast. Like, it really, I don't know. It definitely is a...
I think also it's a great introduction to people who, like, I don't like science fiction. And, part of it's set in outer space, and there are aliens, but it's really about humans.
Right.
And the whole, the conversation that Ender has with Graf about how the species no species could continue if it didn't sort of have the drive to destroy all other species and for self-preservation, basically. And that's why, we have to kill the buggers even though we know they're not coming back. Like, that's some deep philosophical stuff that, the average 12-year-old who just read, a James Patterson book isn't going to pick up on. But I love the fact that it's in here and he is saying these things.
Right.
Which is why I wouldn't categorize it as a children's book or young adult book. I think it's like an everybody book. Like, you can get something from it no matter how old you are. Like, if you're 6 having it read to you at bedtime, or you're 25 just looking for all this stuff, there's something for you.
Yeah,
I agree.
Level. I remember reading the back of this book, and at least at the time, I think the description was like, It was like Ender is a boy genius and he has to go to space to save the world from invading aliens or something. And I was like, good God, that is the worstest. Like, it just sounds. The book sounds so terrible, and I think all science fiction and fantasy books sound terrible on their back cover.
And the front cover, because it looks like really campy cover art.
Yeah, like I remember specifically remember when I first checked out Game of Thrones from the library, and I was in a car with my cousins, and I read, or like my cousin picked it up and he read the back cover out loud. It sounded so stupid. It was like, in this land of long seasons, a knight, a queen, a king, and a lord must work, or like, we'll fight it out, or something. I was like, oh my God. It just sounded.
People who write that stuff they don't read the books.
Yeah.
It's up to the publisher, and the author doesn't really have much say as to what goes on the jacket copy.
Yeah.
When I first heard about a Game of Thrones, I thought it was like a Ender's Game type dystopian sci-fi. Like, I don't know why, but I just had this impression in my mind. I knew nothing about it. Like, I just heard about it, and I heard. Okay, here's what I heard, because the show was already out at this point. I heard that people were fighting over a throne, and there were a lot of naked people in it. And for some reason, this made me think
that's Game of Thrones. I mean, that is Ender's Game.
This made me no, not necessarily, but yeah, it is, I guess. But what this made me think is not like a lot of sex scenes. I thought like these people were like in this weird dystopian world where everyone's naked, and like that's how they cavort with each other. But yeah, not the case.
That's so funny. All right. Is there anything else? Oh, actually, there's one last thing I wanted to ask or mention. There's a few times, specifically when Ender's with Bean, where Ender is very mean and kind of bullying, and like asks himself why he does that when it was done to him. And that was interesting to me. Like, specifically, like, Ender picks up Bean and kind of like slams him against the wall, and just kind of, I don't know if y'all have any comments on that, but why is that just a comment on, we become what we were, or that this is valid in some extent, or just this is part of Ender's personality inherently that he's fighting against, or what is that?
Well, I think he was definitely, and he acknowledges it almost as he's doing it, like, this is exactly what happened to me, and he says, why am I doing it? But I think it might sort of reflect that the IF basically is doing an amazing job of him, sort of reproducing what's been done to him, but he does break with that, and once he does break with that, he does sort of take Bean in as a confidant, after that last battle. But he definitely is going down that road, and he stops himself.
Right.
I agree.
It almost seems like he is Peter plus a layer of wanting to be nice. You know what I mean? Because he still has that reaction. He still is mean, and he's still kind of, obviously not as bad as Peter, but like does push. He still has that, but he wants to be good. You know what I mean? And kind of at the end, well, except for the killing, like all of the buggers, like that's what makes the difference. You know what I mean? Just that he does have that killer instinct, but he has a desire to be nice, and that wins out kind of.
Yeah, that's the point that's hammered home throughout the books. He's partially Peter, partially Valentine, and he needs both to understand the buggers and defeat them. But it's just unfortunate that most of the time throughout this we see more of the Peter in him out of necessity. That's just what Battle School and all of it brings out of him. Yeah,
and anytime we get too much Peter, they literally have to bring in Valentine in her letters or in her physically to like even him out. And that was another, the scene where he says he'll never forgive Valentine for changing his mind. But every time he fights someone, he's doing the I am not Peter, I am Peter. You've created me. This is what I am. And when he does kill them, he says, I killed them all. So I killed their children, all of everything. I didn't want to kill them. I didn't want to kill anybody. I'm not a killer. You didn't want me, you bastards. You wanted Peter. You made me do it. You tricked me. But that doesn't change the fact that he can never forgive himself because he did do it.
And even if these characters are completely out of our reach intellectually, like I can definitely sympathize with just the not wanting to be like your siblings issue that like we all deal with like as like second sons or third kids in this case. It's just you don't want to, you want to do your own thing, it's just this thing everyone deals with.
Yeah. So do you think that I had the point in there about when he does speak for Peter after Peter's dead, does that bring closure to their whole tortured relationship? Do you think he forgave him, or do you think it just sort of was a bookend and he's moving on? Because the later books, it's not over. We know that it's not over. It's always with him, and I don't want to spoil anything.
Let's go for it. It's fine.
No, Peter does come back in some way, or some aspect of Peter does come back, and Ender has to go through all this stuff again.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think in a way almost, and this might be wrong, but that Ender, or at least I kind of like separate, and so I think Ender separates these two people, like Peter the Hegemon and Peter, his older brother who tortured him. So I don't know that he ever really forgives like Peter the child, as much as just kind of recognizes that person has become a different person who is a better person and a person that he can respect. But if this makes any sense, I don't think that he necessarily forgives that child. And I mean, he goes like 80 years
Right.
without having any. So for him, it is really two different people. And I don't think he's really necessarily given the chance to forgive him. It's not like he grew up and saw him changing.
Yeah, well, I definitely came away from that scene with more of a bittersweet ending. It wasn't like a cathartic experience for Ender 100%, but I think it was mixed. But I mean, do you think like when he spoke for him, like he mentioned all the stuff about when he was a kid? I think he probably kept it more to Peter as a man, as the hegemon, but he would have to go into it somewhat if he was being an honest speaker for the dead.
Right, because I almost thought no, but then like that's so much the antithesis of what a speaker for the dead is.
Yeah.
Huh. I mean, I almost feel like you'd have to. But like, I mean, I almost feel like he would have to go in just to be honest about his life. If he was giving an honest account of his life, I feel like he would have to give an account of what Peter was like, at least recognizing that it was from a child's point of view and maybe not completely accurate or what. Yeah, well, I guess he did talk about it. So yeah, I think he probably did talk about when he was a child.
I would hope so.
Yeah, could be wrong, but.
Cool. I think that, I mean, for me, that's all I really have to say. What do you?
Yeah, we got most of the big points.
Yeah, I think so.
I think we should definitely put a spoiler that it does. Because we did mention a lot of stuff from.
Oh yeah, I want to be like, there's spoilers for Ender's Game and Hunger Games and some other stuff that I don't really know about.
All the books in the Enderverse, yeah.
Goosebumps and everything.
Just in case.
Goosebumps, yeah, everything. Just everything was spoiled in this podcast.
Yeah, it's literally everything. Actually, if you just want to add 10 minutes at the end, I figured we can all kind of list spoilers from different books, just to make sure that
we cover everything. Yeah.
Really spoil everything.
Good idea.
Awesome. Okay, well, that wraps it up for this VOK episode on Ender's Game. I hope y'all enjoyed listening. We enjoyed podcasting, and talk to you later.